It is 2024, and we still have the stereotype that kids who are homeschooled end up weird, they're uneducated, maybe illiterate, and their family is a bunch of religious fanatics that abuse them. But that couldn't be further from the truth, and we know that according to the data. And that is what I'm going to present today to kill this myth. And not only that, I'm also going to dive into, as the video says, why homeschooled kids outperform publicly schooled kids. To be more specific, home-educated typically score 15 to 25 percentile points above public school students on standardized academic achievement tests. So why is this? This is actually quite a bit. No longer are we just debunking the whole myth that homeschool kids are uneducated and weird. We established that that's simply untrue. And it goes a lot deeper, and I think it's very interesting. And one thing is that the people who homeschool are much more likely to have two parents in the household, while people who are single mothers, well, they can't really homeschool their kids. I think the amount of single parents who homeschool is around 20%, which means that the people who homeschool, 80% of them are two-parent households, which is not reflected in the standard population today. That plays a huge role. And we know that the people who are raised in single mother households, I'm not attacking them, but it's just the truth. They cannot give as much time and energy and support into these kids because they have to support them. They have to work. Because they're the only one in the house, who's going to be making the money for the family? They have to work, which leaves nobody for them. Well, except for public schools and daycares, which encourages bad behavior. They're not designed to actually raise your children. They do a horrible job at it because you have a teacher, and maybe they have 15 students they have to overlook, or maybe two teachers will be overlooking 15 kids. That's a lot of kids, though. All of those kids, each one of them, requires love, attention, and support from their parents. But a lot of them aren't getting it. Yet they still need it. They still crave for it. So what happens is they naturally figure out that misbehaving, raising a scene, screaming, causing trouble, that gets them the attention they so crave and desire. My mother was actually a teacher, but she quit teaching to homeschool me. But when she went back into teaching, things had changed so drastically in the last 20 years that it was unrecognizable. The kids misbehave so horribly now, at least in the public schools, because you can't discipline them. And the only way teachers are dealing with this bad behavior now is trying to give these kids things to just make them shut up. The kid's crying, what are you going to do? You can't discipline them, so give them popcorn so that they stop screaming, hopefully. You have to give in to them. I mean, when I see kids who are screaming at the grocery stores, of course it's annoying, but I see it also happens for a reason, and it's very sad. They've been trained into misbehaving so that they can get what they need in life, which is attention. And typically, these kids that really misbehave, they're from single mother households. And people always feel as if I'm attacking single mothers when I touch on this, but it's the truth. Even if they love their children, they can only do so much. They're only one parent. You can't be both a mother and a father to these children, and they need two of them. And we also know that support is vital for these kids, not only to be happy, which is why children who are homeschooled also are much more well-adjusted to schools, and they behave better, but it's also vital to get good grades. It's vital to learn. It's vital to stay in the educational system. Unsurprisingly, those without a father in the home fare far worse in educational achievement than two-parent counterparts. Some data shows that if fathers are not engaged, children are twice as likely to drop out of school than children with both parents at home. And also think of this. Kids placed in public schools, well, their parents either A, cannot afford to give them the time, effort, or money required for a good childhood or a good school, whether that be private or homeschooled. Or they do have the finances and they do have the time, but they simply don't because they don't care that much about their children, or they're not wise enough to know that this is vital for their children. Both intentional and unintentional neglect makes them far more likely to put them in public schools or bad schools that were not correctly vetted. And you can see how this all overlaps and kind of feeds into itself. Parents that neglect their children are much more likely to put them in bad schools. And parents that neglect their children are much more likely to raise bad kids. And those kids that are raised poorly are much more likely to make the school a hellhole, which make it worse also for other kids. And those public schools that are bad, in turn, worsen the kids' behavior, even if they had good parents. But if they're placed in that bad environment, it's only going to worsen them. And I know the title of the video is Why Homeschooled Kids Outperform Publicly Schooled Kids, But it's not also just in education. It's not just in the grades. It's not just in their performance, but also happiness, their well-being. Kids who are homeschooled are more likely to be happy. Homeschool kids are not just disciplined better, more socially adjusted, and better behaved, but other things also. One Harvard study conducted on 12,000 kids found that they're at a lower risk of alcohol and drug abuse, depression, and self-deletion than public-schooled kids. And other studies showed that homeschoolers have lower stress levels, are happier, have better self-esteem, and reduced anxiety, and are more forgiving than their counterparts. And again, I think this is one of those things that overlaps because the kids who are homeschooled, they're also more likely to be religious, which makes them probably happier, which would definitely account for why they forgive more. And despite academically outperforming publicly schooled kids, they probably have a more relaxing system, one that isn't so much industrialized, I guess you could say. It's much more one-on-one. You actually know the people you're with. You're being educated with your family, your parents. It's much more personal. The people actually care about you. You're guaranteed a much better teacher, a teacher that actually cares about you. And not to mention the bullying. The bullying is greatly reduced. I guarantee that. People violently attacking you, people ruining your self-esteem, people picking on you because you're smaller. The chances of that happening are greatly diminished. Which is also funny because I knew people who would talk down to me because I was homeschooled, and they acted as if I was uneducated, or I had a bad childhood, or there was something wrong with my childhood because I was homeschooled. And later in private, they actually opened up to me, and they would talk about things how they were actually abused by their fathers, how there were also kids that pulled out knives in the bathrooms and were lighting cars on fire. It's nuts. I personally don't think I was deprived of anything because I was homeschooled. Unless being physically beaten is a form of education. Okay, maybe I skipped out on that class. Naturally, all of those things would play a great role, not only in the happiness and other mental health issues as I talked about before, not only about happiness, the anxiety, the stress, but also all of those things feed into education, into performance. Now, I want to leave on this note. It's not just being homeschooled that is important, but just make sure at least, whether you homeschool, whether you send your kids to private school, whether you send them to public school, make sure to try and send them to a good school. And for the love of all that's good and holy, do not send them to a daycare. And if you have to send them to a daycare, really rethink what you're doing with your kids. You're really screwing up your kids if you send them to a daycare. If you get anything out of this video, don't send them to daycares. And try and stay far away from public schools. Those things just ruin your kids, both when it comes to behavior and just abuse. It's very prevalent in those areas. And make sure that you don't just have kids. Kids aren't a commodity that you own. Kids aren't just some sort of piece of furniture or a pet. You raise kids. That is what you do. They aren't something that you just have. You have to put a great deal of care into them. Otherwise, you're burdening society with your problems. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe. And for my returning viewers, obviously you can see that I have gameplay footage over this. Don't worry, if you don't like this, it's not going to be a reoccurring thing. I'm just trying out some new stuff. And I'm currently working on a longer form video right now. It's like 17 minutes long. And when that one's done, it's going to be a full, complete, high quality video. But if you enjoyed this type, this format, you don't mind that I'm being a bit cheap here with having just gameplay footage over it and doesn't really affect the quality of the content for you, please let me know. Let me know what you think. Maybe I could do this as a reoccurring theme where maybe I have one video that's like this, and I have a high quality video. It allows me to make videos faster despite having the same good quality information with these videos. I don't know, just trying out different things. Let me know what you think. We'll see how this video does. I hope it does well, and I hope you learned something new from it. Take care.